Thank you very much for coming. Before we start, I guess, full disclosure. This is my first RailsConf, so if I do come up to you looking pretty excited, that's because I am. We flew out on Monday from London and flying home on Friday, and it's just been a tremendous privilege to be here, to meet some people that, you know, I've looked at from afar, looked at their code, maybe follow you guys on Twitter, and yeah, it's been a real thrill. The other disclosure is that this is actually my first ever talk. I've never done a tech talk before, so thank you for coming, but more importantly, thank you if you bother to stay. Just as a side, if you've never done a talk before, can I recommend that you apply to do this next year? Because the whole process has been, I'm using the word process. I've been in America so long that I'm saying that, process. The whole process has been just so easy that I would really recommend you do it. It was just, it's just been really relaxed. Like there's no kind of like crazy stuff about send your slides 3 years in advance or any of that. It's just been like, just come and talk to us, and it's just been really, really friendly. So if you've never done it before, can I just recommend that? Everybody's been super lovely. I'm Chris, or Chris the Soul, on pretty much all of the internet things that you can sign up for, because this name is always available, because it's slightly weird. We can talk about that later if you'd like to, but that's not the thing that I want to focus on today. As you can tell, I'm from the UK, and particularly a lovely little county called Suffolk. If you don't know where Suffolk is, I've got a little map for you coming up. But as you've guessed probably by the tractor, the beer, we do loads of farming in Suffolk. We make some really good beer, Adnams beer, and we're pretty good at tourism as well. If you don't know where Suffolk is, then let me describe it. So this is a map of the UK, and this is where Suffolk is. Now, if you don't know what the UK kind of looks like, there's a kind of handy thing that it looks like a witch riding a pig, right? So you can decide what bit of the pig you think Suffolk actually is in this respect. However, the good news is that Suffolk doesn't look like a pig's colon. It looks like this, right? This is Southwold in Suffolk, and these things are called beach huts. And if you thought Brexit was a terrible idea, then you should see how much people will pay for one of these things. It is a staggering amount of money. Okay, so the nice thing about Suffolk is, like I say, loads of people decide to visit it because it's very pretty, very beautiful. So we've got quite a few hotels and campsites and B&Bs and cottages, and I used to work in a consultancy business. We used to build websites. We built a lot of websites for these people, and they all wanted a booking system. And we said, nah, there must be something out there. And they said, no, there isn't anything out there. And we said, no, there must be something out there, and so on and so forth. So we started a company about 8 years ago, and it's called Staylists. We do a lot of online booking for hotels and B&Bs, that kind of thing, for tourism associations as well. And that's what we do. It's all built on Rails. So I guess it's a monolith, because I guess everything's a monolith if it's on Rails, maybe, I don't know. We have about 300 models. We've done about 40,000 commits to the code base over time, and 72 contributors. Now, I don't know whether, hands up whether you think 72 sounds like a lot. Okay, cool. So the interesting thing about 72 contributors is that I'm the only full-time dev that we actually employed for a long time, which kind of makes me the CTO, which is quite cool, right? And Ben, who's down here, joined us probably about 8 months ago. And so for a long time, we've worked with contractors. And so an awful lot of those commits are contractors. And we work with a company in Poland. We've done so for about 6 years. They're called NetGuru. You may have seen some of their stuff like around the internet. They're kind of always big on Rails and stuff like that. And we've always worked with these consultants, and so we have kind of rotations, right? We get a developer for maybe 6 to 9 months. We also take some of their junior developers on for maybe 6 weeks. So we're kind of constantly doing rotations, new people in, new people out, kind of, and we need to get them up to speed as quickly as possible. So they can obviously tackle some of the work we need to do. They can tackle some of those tickets. And the nice thing about rotations is that when people leave, people are always really nice. People are always really nice when they get kind of rotated out of the project. They say nice things, and one of the nice things they say is like, oh, Chris knows everything. Chris knows everything about this code base. If you need anything, just ask Chris, right? Chris is the oracle. That feels really good, right? That feels really good. And so maybe I am. But this is inevitably what happens, right? So we have this idea of a stay list, and a stay list is effectively a collection of hotels or B&Bs or campsites or whatever, a collection of properties that you can book. And they need to set one up, which means they kind of need to set some stuff up, which means they need to set a hotel up, and they need to set the rooms and the rates and like every time, like this developer rotation and the new developer kind of wants this Slack call, I'm like, right, okay, great, okay, I'm gonna have to do it, but I don't really want to. And so I do this Slack call, and it's about an hour, and we go from the developer having this useless local environment into something perhaps worse, which is a precious local environment. And we end up with this situation where almost these people's local environment is like production. Like they're like, God, no, just nobody touch it, right? It's fine, exactly as it is. So it turns out that I'm not really the oracle, and I'm not really the linchpin. I'm just the bottleneck in the business. And that's really where I got to a couple of years ago. And I like knowing things, and I like, people depending on me, but actually when people depend on you an awful lot, you realize that you've built this wrong, right? I made a really grave mistake in kind of not doing, sort of spreading that knowledge earlier. And so, that's a problem, and I needed to solve it. And I guess that people have had bottlenecks in life and business before, and so I kind of, I read a little bit, and I'm kind of always interested in other things other than just programming. I kind of don't come from a programming background as such. I came more from a creative and a product side. And so I kind of look to other people. And one of the people that gave me an awful lot of inspiration is this guy. Hands up if anybody recognizes that name. Okay, cool. So Walter was a grocery store owner. Bizarrely, as I found out after I'd actually written this talk, from St. Paul in Minnesota. He was a grocery store owner about 100 years ago. And he observed something quite interesting in his grocery store, and that was that people only bought as much as they could carry. And if I was Walter, I'd have probably walked home with them and carried some bits. But Walter didn't. He came up with something entirely different, which was one of these. He invented a paper bag. It was invented here in Minnesota. I don't know if you know that. And this pretty much overnight changed the course of Walter's grocery store and arguably shopping ever since. The lovely thing about Walter's solution is that it's incredibly lightweight and repeatable, right? He doesn't need to follow the customers home carrying tins of soup or whatever. And the interesting thing here is that there is something exactly the same for Rails which solved my problem, which is this. It's called rake DB reset. And that's why that's really what this talk is about. It's about rake DB reset. You came to a talk about rake DB reset with all of the wonderful stuff that's going on. So apologies, but let me try and convince you that that was a good idea. Okay, just as a show of hands, anybody got their kind of computers with them today? Brother Max, you got a local environment set up? How many people are prepared to just open up a Rails, and run this? Oh, quite a few of you. Okay, so anybody not prepared to do that? Okay, cool. So I'm going to persuade you that you should want to do that. Right? This is the thing that you should want to do, and I'll tell you why. Okay, but firstly, let's just kind of explore a few things. What happens when I run rake DB reset? Okay, so really, rake DB reset kind of actually does a couple of things. Firstly, it drops the DB, and then it runs DB setup. Okay, so it's just an alias for those two things together. And this is what setup does. It ultimately loads the schema, and then we seed the database. And the seed bit is the thing that I want to focus on, because that's the interesting stuff. That's the thing that can really kind of reduce the dependency on you if you are the one that knows how all of these objects interact with each other. Okay, so what happens when I run rake DB seed? So let's start. Okay, so there's a module called database tasks, and it runs load seed. So far, so good. So if we kind of dive into database tasks, we can see that this load seed, I guess it kind of like delegates, not explicitly using delegate, but it does delegate to this seed loader. Okay, that's cool. What's the seed loader? So let's have a look at actually what the seed loader does. The seed loader is actually the Rails application. Okay, cool. Great, that makes loads of sense. And so therefore in the Rails application, the thing that's actually loading that is there's an engine in Railties which calls load seed. And that, as you can see, it kind of, it finds the DB seeds file and it loads it. So it's just loading a Ruby file. That's what rake DB reset does. It loads the seed. After doing the dropping and the loading the schema, actually the seeding is just loading DB seeds. Everybody got a DB seeds file? Who's not got DB seeds in their Rails application? Okay, right. Hands up who believes you need DB seeds to be able to seed the database. Okay, stay tuned. Right, creating seeds then. So, right, now we know that it's just a Ruby file. We could just create some seeds, right? That's cool. So all we have to do is just use Active Record, and we can create stuff. I personally like creating stuff with a bang because I want this to fail very loudly, because I want it to create these seeds, right? I don't want kind of errors and stuff like that. So this is an obvious way to do it. What's perhaps a few kind of tricks that you might not know are that create can take an array. It can take an array of hashes, and so you can create multiple things like that. Points for the book, anybody? No? Inspector calls. Okay, you can, obviously if you don't want to think of names for 50 people, you can use some gems. We use ffaker with 2 Fs. Strange decision, but there we go. And that means you could do stuff like this. So you could just say, right, okay, maybe I need to create 50 people, and you can use ffaker, and that gives you kind of more interesting data that, could cause sort of problems and stuff like that. You want to kind of see things for real not always using the same names, perhaps longer names might cause some kind of view bugs and stuff like that. So it's quite interesting to do that. Faker's great. It's got like ridiculous amount of fake data that you can get, so you can kind of take some of that stuff. A few of my favorites, we use this to seed kind of an optional extra. So if you're kind of staying at a hotel and you fancy a pie, you can get some kind of meat and herb and spice pie. My favorite one that's come out of that is bear and basil. Interesting one. And just a personal favorite just on the API of that is maybe. I like it. It's just, there's a certain amount of joy in that. Okay, so we're seeding a monolith, right? I mean, we can kind of create some active record stuff, but ultimately, we got 300 models to seed. So, okay, that's going to be a really big seeds file. So we kind of want to split them up. Well, we could do that in DB seeds by just maybe iterating over an array, and we'll just require a relative on it, and it's just going to load them, and we can add them. So that's cool. We could do that. We choose not to do that. We choose to extract those seeds into a class. So here's a way that you could do exactly the same thing, and then you would load those seeds, or you would load this file, sorry. This one. I'm live coding this, obviously, as you've seen. So you would just load this in your seeds file. Here's quite a cool trick, is that you can then run rake db reset and then do seed file equals like pies, if you just wanted to run pies, and then you can use that kind of environment variable to kind of overwrite stuff. That's quite a nifty sort of trick that we worked out. If if you're just working on a piece of the application and you just want to seed one particular file, obviously you can group your seeds as well. That's quite an interesting trick to do, which we've done. Okay, so the bonus round then, which is the interesting bit, is okay. So can you actually run rake db seeds without a db seeds file? And you can. So this is how you do it. So the interesting thing here is you'll notice, if we go back to when we were talking about loading the seeds, that it defers to the Rails application, but you can see that it's kind of like, well, that's kind of like if seed loader is nil, which kind of suggests that seed loader cannot be nil. And obviously, you can then call load seed on something. So the interesting thing here is that what we can then do, if we've got a class which is seeding the database, we can change our kind of, instead of calling it seed bang, which is slightly arbitrary, we can change it to load seed. And then what will happen here is that in that module, in that database tasks module, what we can do is we can actually set the seed loader. So we can now say that the seed loader is actually our seeder class and pass a new instance of that to it. And then when you run rake db seed or rake db reset, what it will do is it will use that class. And that means that you can actually then delete your seeds file, if you so wish. Obviously, you need to include this in application. So that's an interesting little tidbit. So I guess the real takeaways of why we did this, the whole point of doing it, was that what this did for us when we added this seeder class was it gives us an instant local environment. No longer do I have to do the Slack calls. No longer am I wasting time explaining the same thing over and over again. No longer do I have to help people through those sort of struggles, which, if you're building a big system, there are ultimately parts of it where you need work to be done. And what I was doing is I was just doing all that difficult work because I didn't want to have to explain to people, well, you need to set up one of these and one of these. And if you set up one of them like that and they interact like this, then you kind of get a problem, and that's the problem we need to solve. But I didn't want to spend an hour trying to set up the environment in order to then get them to do the work. I'd have rather just done the work myself, which meant that I was doing too much work. I was burning out a little bit, working every night. So the joy of it is it gives you an instant local environment. The other thing, what it does, is it gives you a consistent local environment. And so when you're working with other developers, obviously we work with the guys in Poland. Ben's also remote a few days a week. When you're working with remote developers, it's very, very just easy to kind of communicate the same things, right? If you go here, if you use this particular hotel. And so, you know, in our system, we've set up about 4 different hotels through this seeding. You know, this hotel maybe only accepts kind of single guests, and it uses like length of stay rules, and this is a cottage, and this is a hotel, and it kind of does this kind of things. And so we can now kind of frame problems all in the same kind of consistent language. You know, you can have some fun naming things, you know, and what it does is it just gives everybody a language to communicate about their local environment rather than, you know, because developers are just lazy, right? You just end up with like A hotel and B hotel and A room, and everything costs £1. And it's just like, you know, do as little as possible just to get the thing set up. And so we don't have that problem anymore. The other thing is that we have a resilient local environment, because I can literally reset at the start of every day, and I don't worry about it. I don't worry about going off and doing crazy kind of things with data or trying to run things in the fear that what I'm going to do is just break my local environment and then we have to do the Slack call again. You know, we've added real kind of resilience into the process of building locally. And it actually creates a prosperous local environment as well, because once people realize that they can just reset, they get the joy of doing that, and they understand why. And what happens is that, you know, when people build new things or they solve new problems, they end up editing the seeds file. And the great thing is that now people kind of put things into the seed file, and we have more seeds and more context, and all of these things are available to everybody instantly just by running reset. So you end up with something where you're building together, but you're building these local environments together as well. You know, when you create a new model, it's now part of our process that we go put some seeds in. And this, the wonderful thing about this is that it's there right in front of us. We get to use it for free. It's not, I'm not advocating like overwriting active record, or, you know, I'm not advocating any kind of crazy stuff here. It's just, it was blindingly obvious, and it was all Ben's idea. I must give him the credit for it. It was all Ben's idea. And I'm kind of a bit embarrassed that we didn't have one before. We didn't have a really good seeds file before, because it's just created so, you know, so much speed, pretty much overnight, which is why I, you know, when the call for proposals went out, I was like, I want to talk about this. The other thing that you could do, of course, is, and we were joking with some people at lunch about this, is that, you know, everybody's got a rubbish staging environment. Like there's, you know, there's a staging environment, and maybe like one account is sort of barely usable and stuff like that. And what this does is that you can kind of go, all right, well, we can use this as a staging environment. Like, you can run seeds in staging. It's fine. It's OK. Don't run reset on production. Just avoid that as much as you can. And the nice thing about that is that, again, it improves the communication. And it's kind of boring to go on about it, but it's so important, because all of a sudden you can talk to the QA, and the QA can kind of go, all right, okay, and you're talking about the same thing, the same hotel in the same context, and they're not having to go, well, can I have a call so I can set up the thing that you kind of managed to fix on production, or fix on your local environment, and yeah, there are tests, but we still need to QA it, and so on and so forth. So it does all those things. And when you do all of this stuff, what I think you'll find is that you will reset yourself free. and I'm a little bit early, but that's it. So thank you very much for listening. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah, that's a cracking question. So the question is, when you have external data sources, you've mentioned Stripe. Like how do you seed like maybe one of our hotel connected to Stripe? That's a good question. And look, I haven't got a really clever answer for this, but we use Stripe. As everybody does these days, right? And we use Stripe. Our hotels, we use the Stripe Connect platform. So our hoteliers can kind of, sign up for their own Stripe accounts, and we sort of see the business go through that. And so what we did is we set up just a completely separate dummy Stripe account, and what we did is we connected to it through the application, and you kind of get the account token and the Stripe, the secret key and the public key and those kind of things. We basically took those and we added them into the seed file. And so, like I said, and again, those things are like a right pain in the backside, aren't they, for people to set up? It's kind of like, well, okay, I've got to set up a Stripe token, which, then people are kind of setting up like ngrok servers to kind of go back to places and, all of that sort of stuff. So we kind of took that process out of it and just went, okay, we could do that. And I don't think there's anything wrong with like taking the easy way out and kind of just doing it yourself via the UI and then going, what data have I got in there, and sort of putting that in. So that's how we handle it. It's sort of brutal and simple, but we haven't found a problem with kind of doing it that way. It's a good question. So the question is, if we've got 300 models and there's presumably just a whole load of stuff in the seeds file, do we have any organizational structure for that? The simple answer is no, we don't. We stick them all in a subfolder called seeds, and they all mimic the name of the model that they seed, right? Otherwise, kind of like, how crazy are you to not do that? So what our seed file does do is it groups things into logical layers. So, we have subfolders again in seeds for like the hotels. So we kind of say, right, okay, our hotels have got slightly sort of strange names that we deliberately set up, and we have to fix some stuff because we work off subdomains a lot. So kind of everything is subdomain. Like I think we nicked that off Shopify. I think Shopify did that, or a lot of people do that. So yeah, we kind of have fixed names for our hotels, and then use ffaker to kind of fake all the data that goes into it. And those sit in subfolders, but it's just using some, and those just require relative in themselves, right? But I mean, there's nothing too brilliant there. It's all fairly kind of simple. But yeah. Yeah, that's a really good question. So the question is, how do you seed relationships where relationships are important? You've got lots of relationships, interacting objects, those kind of things. Yes. So the reason that obviously we do use the seed class is so we can specifically define which ones get created first, right? If you kind of just require a relative on that directory, you kind of don't have the control of, I want to see these first and this one and this one. The way that we kind of handle relationships, again, is just a bit obvious and a bit simple, is to, at the top of a seeds file, we'll just load, for potentially that given hotel, we'll create those relationships in a separate seeds file. So, for instance, we will have /seed/ I think the Old Frog is one of our seed hotels. So we kind of have /the Old Frog, and then all of the rooms for that particular hotel are in there. So we have multiple seed files of the same name, and they're creating the same objects, but just for different relationships, and kind of splitting it up like that. But yeah, we haven't found a better way than just basically loading that object at the top of the seed file and just using that object's ID just to make sure that that works. It works for us. It works for us. And like I said, we just kind of do a lot of like looping and sometimes just take the easy way out, right? Just kind of, if you're creating these relationships, just create a relationship for everything. Like, you know, just dot all and then loop around it and then create a relationship to all the other things. And we keep things as simple as possible because otherwise, you know, you kind of risk, you know, making this stuff, you know, complex again that you're managing seeds is not really what you want to be doing day to day. So that's kind of how we handle the relationship side of it. And that's worked really, really well. It's simple, but sometimes simple is enough and to sort of get you by. So the question is, do we have an issue with sort of seeds getting stale? The honest answer is not at the moment. The reason for that is because we probably only introduced this at the start of this year. And so we haven't really seen an issue where seeds are kind of becoming stale. I imagine they will at some point. I suppose we're in that honeymoon phase at the moment where it's like, oh, like, you know, we kind of log into a hotel and there's loads of bookings for it and there's loads of real data and, you know, it's got prices and all this sort of stuff. So we are at the honeymoon phase and I don't know, maybe they'll invite me back in 2020 to talk about stale seeds. That'll be a talk that everybody will run to. Yeah, there was one other thing I was kind of going to talk about the relationship stuff is we have like just a nice little utility class called a dice, and we kind of sort of do dice rolls and stuff like that in order to kind of create sort of random associations and for that to make it sort of feel a bit fun. So we kind of do, yeah, just basic little Ruby classes to have some fun, and it does, yeah, it just gives you a sense of sort of joy and just general kind of programming pleasure to sort of create these things. And we've had some fun kind of, you know, with like output in the console as well. Like do that. Don't just kind of run seeds and wait for it. Like output like ridiculous fun stuff in the console. And we've got, you know, handcrafted things. And yeah, we kind of output all these sort of ridiculous sort of verbs for what we're doing. So yeah, you can kind of have a lot of meta programming fun within seeds. Like they're much more fun than they sound, he says. So the question is, have we tried any gems for it, for seeding? And there are quite a few. Seed foo. I think there was another one that I can't think. To be honest, we didn't, because we kind of knew what we wanted to do a little bit. A lot of those, some of the gems that we've seen kind of were exporting data from kind of maybe like production environments and stuff like that. Obviously, we didn't want to do that because we have some very sensitive data. It just felt like one of those things that we didn't need to kind of over-engineer it, and we didn't want to have a dependency that we then needed to kind of work out. It just felt like it kind of grew quite organically. It was like, just anything's better than what we've got now. And so we did that, and then we kind of created a class out of it, and we kind of went through those phases rather than sort of sat down and created some master plan of exactly what would come of it. So it was much more organic than that, and it's still very simple. But I think that if you look at the gems and you find a gem which is the thing that you want to do, then by all means, you know, you should actually use that, and if that makes sense to you. Yeah, don't spend too much time, you know, reinventing the wheel. But for us, it was good fun. It was good little project to do, and got everybody involved in, hey, we can do this now. This is cool. So the question is, do we use seeds in our test files? The answer is no, and it's as simple as that. I think the reason, you know, our seeds file takes probably a minute and a half to kind of create. I suppose you could take that data and sort of use that data, you you know, in integrated tests and stuff like that, and maybe that's kind of something that we will look at in the future. But no, at the moment, I mean, we're probably, like a lot of people, we've got like an RSpec, you know, and we've got like a, you know, a ton of lets at the top, and you know, we kind of create that data arbitrarily, and everybody has a little bit of fun about what thing that they decide to, you know, call their sort of stubs or whatnot. So yeah, we don't do that. Although we do test the seed file works. The question is, do we have a guide for setting up the way that we've set it up? No, we don't. But if you're interested in that, I'll write it. I have got various blog posts at christhesole.com, because that was available as well. And yeah, I'll definitely put something up, kind of post this, and I guess I'm going to send these slides somewhere and put those up. So I'll kind of maybe share the way that we do our seeding specifically, and how, you know, I don't know, maybe we could turn it into a gem, Ben. Maybe. We'll see. But I'll definitely write it up. So yeah, if you kind of want a lightweight seed class, then here's how to go about it. Yeah. Nobody else? Okay. Well, again, thank you very much. I'm Chris, if you want to come and talk to me. I wore this shirt especially, so you'll be able to find me somehow. All right, thanks. Have a great time.